A decree to grant peace to his wife destroyed Qiao Anyi's life and took away countless lives. 10 years later, a medical woman named Mei Xue came from Sichuan and disrupted a pool of spring water in the capital city of Luoyang. The news of Prince Shu's critical illness has been circulating for over a decade, but he not only did not die, but also lived like a white moonlight in the hearts of all the ladies in the capital. I always come across my master acting coquettishly in Miss Mei's arms, eating so much dog food that I wish I could poke both of my eyes blind. Keywords of the novel. She has a pair of golden eyes with no pop-ups, she has a pair of golden eyes. Download the complete TXT collection, and she has a pair of golden eyes to read the latest chapters. Chapter 1. Taiping Town. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Taiping Town. In the 20th year of the Mingde reign, it was located in Taiping Town, western Sichuan. In early spring, after a night of wind and rain, the early blooming crabapple flowers fell all over the ground. The stream murmurs, the eaves are scattered, and the small town built along the river is almost surrounded by a few clusters of green bamboo in every corner. People all know that Wang's daughter.in-law was born with a strange creature with white hair and eyebrows. The young daughter.in-law couldn't resist being frightened and cursed by her mother.in-law's family, so she hung up that night. Now Mrs. Wang is going to throw the monster into the sinking pond, and almost all the idle people in the town are running to watch the excitement. In the chilly spring season, the child was thrown naked into a broken bamboo basket, covered in blue and purple, motionless, without even a faint cry. Mrs. Wang angrily walked at the front, cursing loudly that her daughter.in-law was a disaster and would even implicate their family if she died. The crowd following behind and watching the excitement were discussing, some saying that the Wang family was unlucky, while others said that Mrs. Wang was ruthless, but no one dared to approach. Taiping Town in the western mountain valley of Pianan River has not been so lively for a long time. As they advanced, the noisy crowd suddenly came to a stop, and the voices of discussion abruptly came to an end. A gentle breeze comes, and green clouds flow. A young girl stood quietly on the stone steps at the corner. The light blue half-worn outer garment has no trace of decoration, only embroidered with two small green butterflies on the pure white scarf, with a graceful and flying appearance. A primary-colored wooden hairpin wrapped around the long blue hair of the crow, and a pair of ordinary silver lilacs were worn on the pure white earlobes. The steps were lined with green bamboo, and a gentle breeze blew. The woman's skirt was light and graceful, as if blending with the surrounding scenery. Although she was a young woman, at first glance, she gave off the illusion that a gentleman is like a jade. The girl in green stood quietly, looking expressionlessly at Mrs. Wang and the lively crowd behind her. Mrs. Wang first showed her shyness and took a few steps back without daring to speak, nor did she dare to look at the girl in green. Her daughter.in-law had a difficult childbirth and invited a girl in green to come and help. On that day, the girl in green once advised her to treat her daughter.in-law and newborn child well. People obviously knew this girl in green and seemed to be very respectful of her. The girl's gaze swept through the crowd, and many people quickly lowered their heads. In the suppressed silence, the girl in green walked towards Wang Posey and took off her thin cloak as she walked. Putting an ingot of silver in a broken bamboo basket, the girl in green carefully wrapped the baby in a cloak and held it in her arms. He didn't look at Mrs. Wang either, just picked up the child and turned around before leaving. Seeing the silver, the anxiety on Mrs. Wang's face suddenly disappeared, and she grabbed the silver and ran away. The crowd became noisy again, and two women caught up with the girl in green and tried to persuade her. "Miss Mei, we all know you're kind-hearted, but keeping such a monster around us will not only bring bad luck to you, but also to the whole town." The girl in green stopped and glanced at the two women, holding the child in her arms tighter. She politely and distantly turned her head and said to the crowd, "This child is not a monster, he is just sick, and the cause is not his mother, but his father. I can tell everyone that in the future, no matter who his father's sequel is, as long as he gives birth to a boy, he will definitely be like this child. Everyone was once again shocked, and someone shouted. Isn't the Wang family about to become extinct? The girl in green didn't answer and only closed her eyes slightly. Looking up again, the girl in green's eyes were icy cold, and she looked at the crowd indifferently, saying, Since I have adopted this child, from now on, I will be the only one to bear his misfortunes and blessings. If you are afraid of being implicated, just come and tell me that we will leave Taiping town immediately and not implicate the villagers. As soon as the words fell, the girl in green had already lifted her foot and left. The slender figure disappeared into the small alley surrounded by green bamboo, straight and stubborn, with a coldness that was not stained with dust. An old man walked out of the crowd and scolded the two talkative women. What are you talking about? If Miss Mei leaves, where else can we find such a good doctor like her? Many people nodded, and a man pointed at the woman who had just spoken and angrily said. From the Lu family, your brother is almost dying of tuberculosis. He came to our Taiping town to have Miss Mei cured. What face do you have to gossip about Miss Mei? The two women were scolded with red faces and ears, unable to argue, and had to run away disheartened. The crowd dispersed in small groups, and on the bamboo tower on the street, the black-clad man standing at the window sneered coldly. The man in black has a tall figure, a cold and stern face, and a strong physique indicates that he is a person who practices martial arts year-round. The young master in red standing next to him heard the man in black sneer and frowned, saying, Shen Qingyang, why are you laughing? Don't look at that girl's kind demeanor, she's actually a heartless villain. I almost knelt down for her, but she still refuses to go to Chengdu to treat her cousin's illness. The young master in red is extremely handsome, with a jade-like face and red lips and white teeth, so even if he is angry, he looks unique and charming. Shen Qingyang snorted and lowered his head to tighten the wrist guard on his hand, saying calmly and slowly. You didn't touch her because you didn't grasp her weakness. The young master in red was greatly surprised and widened his eyes, saying, Miss Mei is a famous and good doctor in these 10 miles and 8 townships. I really haven't heard anyone say a bad word about her. Why do you just? Shen Qingyang was clearly impatient to say more, raised his eyebrows and looked out the window, saying, You don't have to make a big fuss. The news from the capital will arrive in the next few days. If my guess is true, she can definitely follow us to Chengdu obediently. After Shen Qingyang finished speaking, he turned around and left. His tall body was walking on the bamboo stairs, but there was no sound at all. The young master in red stood still for a long time before quickly chasing down the stairs. Mei Xue carried the child back home, and Zhang Mama had already baked the quilt so hot. Yurong stood at the entrance of the courtyard, took the child from Mei Xue's arms, and flew towards the bedroom. The little child has no reaction to everything around him, even his eyelids are blue and purple. Mei Xue repeatedly placed her hands in hot water until they turned red, and then gently rubbed the child's palms and soles into the blanket. Yurong squatted by the bed, pulling on the charcoal tray and constantly scrutinizing the child's reaction. In a hurry, Yurong's face turned red. Grandma Zhang remained calm and patiently fed the child's mouth with warm water. The master and servant were busy until afternoon when the unconscious child finally woke up. I still can't open my eyes, the crying is so low that I can hardly hear it, but at least I can suck on warm water. Grandma Zhang was overjoyed and quickly heated up the sheep's milk to bring in and feed it to the child. After confirming that the child did not have a fever, Mei Xue breathed a sigh of relief, washed her hands and face, and poured herself a cup of hot tea. Yurong stood anxiously beside Mei Xue, peering at her face and saying, Miss, Grandma and I have already tidied up everything. Are we still going according to the plan? Mei Xue remained silent and turned her face to look at the child on the bed. After a long time, she pursed her lips and said, In a few days, let's wait until the child is better before we leave. After Mei Xue finished speaking, she left the room, and Zhang Mama and Yurong looked at each other speechlessly. The young master surnamed Xiao came to invite the girl to Chengdu for the first time, but the girl refused directly. However, that night, the girl instructed them to pack up. But without much explanation, he only said, "He's from the capital." Zhang Mama and Yu Rong were both poor people taken in by the old lady before her death. They only knew that the old lady also had a Beijing accent. A few years ago, they settled in Taiping town to practice medicine with the girl, and no matter how much, they knew nothing. If it's really strange, there are only 2 points. Although the girl has excellent medical skills, she never shows off. I visit patients for the first 3 days of each month to make a living, and stay indoors for the rest of the time, unwilling to snatch the job of my peers. Furthermore, the girl never travels far and doesn't even leave Taiping town, so patients often come from afar to Taiping town. People say that girls are best at treating lung diseases, even tuberculosis can be cured. The girl told them that the patients she treated who coughed up phlegm and blood were not tuberculosis, and tuberculosis cannot be cured. Life was plain and peaceful, and Zhang Mama and Yurong didn't understand why when they met a young master from the capital, the girls suddenly insisted on leaving Taiping town. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Disappearances. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Disappearances. Having prepared a few things that her mother loved to eat, Mei Xue had just been discharged from the hospital with a basket when she saw Xiao Yan in front of her. A bright red brocade robe, a royal blue belt, and a goose yellow gold sprinkling folding fan are painted with beautiful pictures of beauties. The handsome young man dressed himself up as a flower in spring with these brilliant colors. As soon as he saw Mei Xue, Xiao Yan immediately smiled and ran towards her with open teeth and claws. Mei Xue frowned and turned her head towards the path. Xiao Yan took a few steps to catch up with Mei Xue and stopped her, saying with a smile, "Miss Mei, we're meeting again." Mei Xue frowned and looked coldly at Xiao Yan, saying, "Xiao Gongzi, I think I have already made it very clear to you that you really don't need to keep pestering me like this." Xiao Yan didn't care at all and still grinned. He inserted the fan into his belt and enthusiastically wanted to carry the basket for Mei Xue. "Where is Miss Mei going?" "I'll see you off." Mei Xue dodged Xiao Yan, looked up at the gradually fading horizon, and then turned to look at Xiao Yan helplessly, saying, "I think you also know that I just brought a sick child home today. Please wait for me another 2 or 3 days. When the child is better, I will go with you to Chengdu immediately." Xiao Yan was overjoyed and said with a beaming expression, "That's great, Miss Mei. Don't worry, whether my cousin's illness is cured or not, the Shu Prince's mansion will definitely give him a heavy thank you. I, Xiao Yan, will also remember this kind of kindness from you for a lifetime." Mei Xue nodded and walked slightly towards Xiao Yan, then quickly towards the direction of the back mountain. "It has been 3 years since my mother passed away, and Mei Xue wants to accompany her again before leaving Taiping town. She fled from the capital to western Sichuan and remained ill for almost a year, being held in her mother's arms without letting go. My father, brother, and sister both died on the way to escape. My mother didn't dare to stop, but ran forward desperately holding her, shedding tears as she ran. Mother's tears kept dripping onto Mei Xue's face, and the warm and bitter feeling remained clear in her memory. Mei Xue knew that she would never forget her mother's tears in this lifetime. For nearly 10 years, my mother never mentioned anything about the people or things in the capital to her, and only worked hard to raise her. My mother even deceived her, saying that my father and siblings died of illness on the way to marriage. My mother also said, let her live well and never leave Taiping town. Never go to Chengdu, especially the capital city. My mother said there are many bad people there and it's easy to be deceived. But actually she knows everything. Because she is not Qiao Anyi, the real Qiao Anyi has already lost her life on the cold and rainy night in the back alley of Qiao's house. She is just a lonely soul from 1,000 years later. She knew that her father and siblings died at the hands of those who were chasing them. She also knew that it was the accumulated hatred and pain in her heart that made her mother's hair turn white before she was 40 years old. Just to keep her alive, my mother would rather bring her deep-seated hatred to the grave than mention a word to her. Not to mention the Qiao family, Mrs. Mei is just an increasingly vague presence in her heart. The only people she deeply loves are her mother, as well as her father, brothers, and sisters who her mother misses with tears every night. Mei Mama, who took the risk of sending her away from the Qiao family, didn't know if she was still alive in this world. Mei Xue is willing to listen to her mother's words, forget everything from the past, and live a peaceful life. Tears slowly slid down in the evening breeze, and Mei Xue reached out to stroke the blue stone monument in front of her, murmuring, "Mother, where should I go after leaving Taiping town? In this lifetime, I only wanted to be here with you." When Yurong found the mountain, Mei Xue was wrapped in a cloak and had already fallen asleep leaning against the stone tablet. Yurong was so heartbroken that she started crying. In recent years, although the girl often came to sit alone at the old lady's tomb, this time it was different. "They may never come back, the girl is really sad." Mei Xue was awakened by Yurong's sobs, and after a moment of confusion, she stood up and asked her, "How is the child doing?" Yurong quickly wiped away her tears and said, "The child started to heat up, and the mother was so anxious that she couldn't help but let me find the girl." Mei Xue lowered her head, pursed her lips and sniffed. When she looked up again, her sorrowful expression had completely disappeared. The master and servant hurried home. When they entered the courtyard, Mei Xue glanced at the new wonton stall in the distance without leaving a trace. Zhang Mama was anxiously spinning around when she saw Mei Xue enter the door and quickly welcomed her, saying, "Miss, I'm afraid this child is not doing well. It's been scorching hot in just a moment." Mei Xue nodded and said the prescription, instructing Grandma Zhang to cook soup and medicine, and also asking Yurong to fetch the liquor. The child's small body was burning hot, and Mei Xue held him in her arms, as if holding a piece of hot charcoal. Yurong boiled the liquor on the stove, crying while cooking. "This child seems lifeless." Although she didn't understand why, Yurong knew that the girl valued this child very much. They could have left Taiping town earlier, but it was only to deliver this child that they have been dragging it on until now. The girl knew early on that Wang's daughter-in-law's pregnancy was abnormal, right? Yurong didn't know why the girl could tell, but she never asked much. Mei Xue remained calm as she untied the child's clothes, soaked her handkerchief in hot liquor, and kept wiping the child's palms, soles, and armpits. Zhang Mama mixed the soup and medicine for the medicinal bath, and together with Yurong, burned several charcoal pots and placed them around. Mei Xue, wearing only a white inner garment, sat in the bathtub holding her child. Zhang Mama and Yurong would add some hot medicinal soup to the bathtub every once in a while, soaking for an hour before stopping, and then repeating it every 2 hours. So, after tossing and turning for 2 days, the child finally breathed calmly and fell asleep in Mei Xue's arms. The master and servant were all exhausted from agony. Grandma Zhang picked up the child and wiped her clothes on the bed, while Yurong helped Mei Xue wipe her hair. While busy, her eyes turned red. Mei Xue let out a soft sigh and stroked Fu Yurong's shoulder, saying, "Don't worry, as long as the fever doesn't continue tomorrow, the child will be fine." Zhang Mama wrapped the child in a thick swaddle and held it in her arms, saying to Mei Xue, "I can survive this way. This child is also a tough guy. Why don't you give him a name, girl?" Mei Xue took the hot tea handed over by Yurong and slowly drank it before saying for a long time, "His mother's surname is Zhou, let's call him Zhou Pinyin in the future." Grandma Zhang nodded repeatedly and looked at the child in her arms with tenderness, saying, "Okay, with that name, it would be best to grow up safely." With her eyes drooping and the aroma of hot tea in her hand lingering, Mei Xue only slightly curled her lips. A lifetime of peace is what many people dream of, but how many people can achieve it? It was already late at night, and Shin Qingyang was looking down at the letter. Xiao Yan was so anxious that he scratched his ears and cheeks, and reached out to grab the letter from Shenqinyang's hand. Let me see, what exactly is the news coming? Shenqinyang shook off Xiao Yan's hand, stood up, placed the letter on the candlelight, and lit it up, saying, You don't need to know, come with me to Mei's house now, she will definitely come with us. Xiao Yan became even more anxious and shouted at Shenqinyang. Shenqinyang, let me tell you, Miss Mei is just a doctor, and she has already agreed to go with us to Chengdu. She just needs a few days to save that child, so I won't allow you to use your skills at the Yulin Guard on her. Shenqinyang was a famous figure in front of Emperor Mingde, and at a young age, he became the leader of the Yulin Guard. He controlled the security of the entire capital. No one in the capital disrespects this young leader, but no one hopes to get involved with Shenqinyang. Because the places where the Yulin Guard enters and exits are either home raids or ethnic extermination. Shenqinyang sneered and ignored. Xiao Yan became anxious and extended his arms to block the door, saying, Shenqinyang, even if it's not for my cousin's sake, you can't use force against Miss Mei. You know very well that if my cousin's illness cannot be cured and he cannot go to the capital, you cannot explain it to your majesty. We can't afford this risk, so we'll wait until dawn and go to Mei's house as soon as it's light. Shenqinyang sneered silently and went to bed to sleep, agreeing to Xiao Yan's request. Xiao Yan breathed a sigh of relief and wiped the sweat off his forehead before returning to his room. However, as soon as it was slightly dawn and Xiao Yan had not yet woken up, the people he had left near the Mei mansion rushed to the inn and gasped for breath, saying, Young master, it's not good. That Dr. Mei has run away, and the whole family has run away. Xiao Yan suddenly lost all sleep and didn't care about putting on his shoes, so he ran to Shenqinyang's room. However, he only saw Shenqinyang's back and disappeared from the window like a flying bird. Originally, a few people took their children to seek medical treatment at the Mei mansion the evening before yesterday and didn't leave until late at night. This morning, an elderly man in Taiping town fell seriously ill. The doctors at the town clinic were unable to cure him. After carrying him to the Mei family, they found that the 3 servants of Mei Xue, including the child, had disappeared. The farmer who stayed at Mei's house the night before yesterday went to seek medical treatment. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Spring Rain Night. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Spring Rain Night. 3 women were so frightened by a large group of strangers in front of them that they burst into tears. When Shenqinyang, who was as evil as a demon, entered the courtyard with a black face, these few people dared not even cry. Xiao Yan ran to the Mei mansion panting heavily and heard an old woman crying. It is said that Mei Xue once saved the lives of her family, and this time they were invited to come late at night to just help take care of the house, without knowing anything else. Seeing that Shenqinyang still had a dark face, the old woman turned to look at Xiao Yan and kept kowtowing and pleading. Shenqinyang was gasping for breath and turned to stare at Xiao Yan, who was still gasping for breath, asking, Is this the result of you sending someone to guard it? Xiao Yan's face turned red and he couldn't speak. Shenqinyang snorted coldly and strode out of the yard to command his attendants. Divide into 4 routes, 2 heading south, and the other 2 following me towards Chengdu. Follow me separately by water and land. Xiao Yan bent down to support his knee and gasped for breath, loudly asking Shenqinyang. Shenqinyang, are you stupid? How could Miss Mei possibly run to Chengdu? Shenqinyang sneered and said to Xiao Yan with disdain. In front of you, she's just a fox, selling you and helping her count money. A group of people disappeared in an instant, leaving only Xiao Yan and a few subordinates standing at the entrance of the Mei family. The boat was sailing on the water, with fine rain falling one after another. Mei Xue, dressed in green clothes, sat by the small window holding her child. A small boat secretly hired only had an elderly boatman. In order to walk faster, Yurong and Zhang Mama took turns going out to help the boatman row. Approaching noon, Yurong carried a curtain into the cabin and didn't care about wiping the rain from her hair and face. She quickly picked up the stove and went to the back to cook. First, I heated the lamb milk for the child and brought it in. Mei Xue tried the temperature and fed it slowly into her safe mouth with a small spoon. Ping'an was sleeping soundly in Mei Xue's arms, but as soon as the spoon touched his lips, he immediately opened his small mouth. Seeing the sweet and fragrant food eaten by Ping'an, Yurong's face showed a smile, and then she felt a little worried. "Miss, you said this sheep's milk needs to be fresh. So what about Ping'an tomorrow?" In order to leave safely, except for a little money, their masters and servants almost left Taiping town empty-handed. I didn't dare to bring the soft and delicate things that were originally packed. The water bag for installing sheep milk for Ping was still hidden in Mama Zhang's arms and taken away. Mei Xue patiently waited for Ping'an to suck the sheep's milk from the spoon clean before looking up and saying to Yurong, "Don't worry, we'll be in the city early tomorrow morning. Once we arrive, we'll get off the boat and buy fresh milk for our children. We'll find an inconspicuous place to stay for a few more days, then head back and take a boat to Zhejiang. Since there is nowhere to go, let's go to Qiantang. After all, that is the hometown of my father and mother, as well as Mrs. Mei's maternal home." Yurong didn't ask Mei Xue why she did this. Although the girl is young, she has always had an idea. 2 bowls of vegetables and 1 pot of porridge. Mei Xue asked Zhang Mama to share a portion and send it to the boatman, and the master and servant sat down to start eating. The rain in the afternoon grew heavier and heavier, and the small boat was thin. By evening, it was no longer possible to sail. The boatman finally found a place to stop the ship, and Mei Xue walked up to the deck in a raincoat. From a distance, she could see a big ship rushing towards her quickly and suddenly. On the deck of the big ship, the lights were brightly lit and the darkness was filled with people. After a long sigh, Mei Xue closed her eyes. She instructed Mama Zhang and Yurong not to leave the cabin with their children, and Mei Xue returned to the deck, watching the ship approaching alone. Her face remained calm and indifferent. Through the rain and mist, Xiao Yan had already recognized Mei Xue on the deck and quickly tugged at Shen Qingyang's sleeve, saying, "Shen Qingyang, let me tell you, Mei Xue is by no means a person to threaten. If you stay here, I will go and talk to her well." Shen Qingyang sneered and shook Xiao Yan, then rose into the air. The tall man landed on the deck, causing the small boat to shake violently for a while. Startled, Ping'an cried in the cabin. Mei Xue didn't look at Shen Qingyang. The heavy rain was pouring down like a ladle, and the raincoat couldn't cover it at all. She reached out to stroke the rain on her forehead and said, "The medical notices of the Shu Prince's mansion are spread throughout various prefectures, and I have also heard of them. I have already told Mr. Xiao that there is no cure for tuberculosis, and death is a matter of time. Even if you tie me up to Chengdu, it will be of no use." Shen Qingyang snorted and stared sharply at Mei Xue, saying, "Regardless of whether it can be treated or not, you must go to the royal mansion because I know much more than you imagine. I don't care if your surname is Mei or Qiao, but there is one thing I can tell you as a reward for inviting you to Chengdu." Mei Xue frowned and turned her head coldly to look at Shen Qingyang. "Are you threatening me?" Shen Qingyang sneered and stared at the thin but chilly woman in front of him, saying, 10 years ago, the Mei family in Qiantang was exterminated by Japanese pirates. At that time, the Qiantang general was named Tai Lanxiang, who was the former branch of Yan Yunkai, a married relative of the Qiao family. In the second year of the Mei family's extermination, Yan Yinsai's legitimate young son married an illegitimate daughter of Tai Lanxiang, which could not be considered a match of equal status. The sound of rain was noisy, but the deck was as silent as if it had frozen. Mei Xue remained unmoved for a long time before calmly saying, "I don't know what you're talking about." Shen Qingyang burst out laughing loudly. The woman in the night rain was as cold as a block of ice, with only a pair of dark eyes shining. He slowly approached and stared at her sparkling eyes, saying, "You really have a heart of stone. Since dead people can't move you, I'll tell you something about living people. Mei Xue took 2 steps back, distancing herself from Xinqinyang. Her feet were already standing on the edge of the deck. Xiao Mei's wet nurse, who lost the Qiao family girl, was thrown into the manor with her legs broken. According to the latest news I have received, this wet nurse is still alive, just not as good as dead. Do you think she's been waiting for someone after all these years of hard work? Mei Xue's body shook and fell uncontrollably into the water. Xinqinyang flew forward and grabbed Mei Xue's arm, pulling her back. Mei Xue vigorously shook off Xinqinyang's hand, and a flash of water flashed through her eyes, but her voice remained indifferent. I can go to Chengdu, but I cannot guarantee that I can cure that young master's illness. Additionally, besides these 2 pieces of news, I need you to do something else to exchange with me. Xinqinyang finally had a smile in his eyes and looked at Mei Xue with some satisfaction, saying, As long as you are willing to go to Chengdu, I can send a message to arrange for someone to take the old lady away from Qiao Yan's estate. It's easy for me to hide someone in the boundaries of the capital city. As for the future, we can negotiate further. Mei Xue didn't speak, just nodded and walked towards the cabin. She can listen to her mother's words, stay away from the capital, stay away from the past and old people, and even force herself to forget all the deep-seated grudges. But as the person in front of her said, she cannot ignore those who are still alive. Father and mother, as well as brothers and sisters, are the only relatives of Mei Mama in this world, but they are all gone. She owes Grandma Mei too much. Zhang Mama hugged Ping An and hid in the cabin with Yu Rong in fear and unease. The old boatman was so frightened that he trembled all over, curled up at the stern of the ship and dared not move. Mei Xue comforted Yu Rong and Zhang Mama not to panic, then touched Ping An's forehead and small hand and said, The young master of the Shu Prince's mansion is seriously ill, and they will not allow me to walk slowly by boat. However, Ping An's health is weak and he must not be swayed by vehicles or horses. As she spoke, Mei Xue turned around and looked outside. The big ship had already docked, with some holding lanterns and others building partitions. The young master named Xiao Yan shouted and jumped onto the small boat of Master Mei Xue's servant. Mei Xue turned around and reminded Grandma Zhang. Mammy, I will ask them to take you to Chengdu by big boat, and I will write a few more prescriptions for you. Once you get sick again on the safe road, you will take care of him according to the prescriptions. If it still doesn't work, you can seek medical treatment along the way. Grandma Zhang nodded with tears in her eyes, and Yurong burst into tears, insisting on accompanying Mei Xue on the journey. Mei Xue smiled bitterly and touched Yurong's hair, saying, I don't have time anymore. Remember to listen to Grandma and take good care of yourself. The heavy rain connected the heavens and the earth into a murky expanse, and Mei Xue's master and servants moved on to the big boat. Xiao Yan, after being busy with everything, seemed to completely forget that Mei Xue had just deceived him. Xinqinyang stood in the rain, holding his arms and looking coldly at Xiao Yan and Mei Xue's servants, without saying a word more. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. The Poison of Bamboo Chicken. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 5. Shu Prince's Mansion. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Shu Prince's Mansion. The journey of several hundred miles took Mei Xue and others less than 3 days, and they arrived in Chengdu just after noon. The people of the Shu Prince's mansion had long been waiting at the city gate. Peng Liang was the personal guard of the eldest son of the prince's mansion, Li Jinji. He was already exhausted, and when he saw Xiao Yan, he choked up and was about to cry. Xiao Yan was startled and jumped off his horse, grabbing Peng Liang's collar and asking, "What's wrong with your ghostly appearance? How's my cousin doing?" Peng Liang cried uncontrollably, and the attendant beside him looked at Xiao Yan and Xinqinyang with fear and said, "The eldest young master has been sleeping for several days now, and he hasn't been able to get any water or rice in the past 2 days. Xiao Yan was both anxious and angry, unable to talk to Peng Liang anymore. He quickly turned around and said to Mei Xue, "Miss Mei, hurry up and go save my cousin." Peng Liang and the attendants of the royal family were all surprised, unable to believe that such a young girl was the divine doctor that Xiao Yan and Shen Qingyang had spent a lot of effort to bring back. Faced with the puzzled gazes of the crowd, Mei Xue remained silent and only nodded slightly to follow Xiao Yan into the city. In the afternoon, it was a bustling time on the street, and the iron cavalry of the royal mansion galloped by, spreading the news rapidly. After the discussion, most people shook their heads and sighed. The Wang mansion has no other choice, otherwise how could they hire a female doctor back? She's still so young. Isn't it just that there's nothing we can do? Even the imperial physicians in the capital have come countless times, and there's still nothing we can do. It's a pity that the princess's love for her son is so great that she has been begging gods and worshipping Buddha everywhere for the sake of her eldest son. The Shu prince's mansion was so quiet that Mei Xue followed Xiao Yan and Shen Qingyang directly to the Zhi Zhu garden where Li Jin lived. The green bamboo sways, and the bright spring light spreads on the branches and leaves, making it dazzling green. Xiao Yan almost rushed into the main room, with Mei Xue quickly following behind him and Shen Qingyang following beside Mei Xue, still silent. Only when he reached the bedroom door did he coldly command a maid. "You, go and invite the prince over immediately." The maid nodded hastily and hurried out. The room was filled with the fragrance of medicine, and what Mei Xue saw first was a middle-aged lady. When Xiao Yan called the lady aunt, Mei Xue knew she was the princess of Shu. Under 40 years old, her face was very haggard, her clothes were plain, and she didn't wear hairpins. It was probably because she had been crying for a long time, and her eyes were visibly red and swollen. The princess of Shu was obviously surprised by Mei Xue's youthfulness, but she was only stunned for a moment. Then, with tears in her eyes, she politely said to Mei Xue, "Miss, come and take a look at me. As long as there's a way, no matter what I'm asked to do, just speak up." Mei Xue bowed to the princess of Shu, didn't care to speak, and cleared her hands before walking towards the bed. At the first glance of Li Jinji, Mei Xue was instantly surprised. Black hair is like ink, and under excessively pale skin, blue blood vessels can be faintly seen. Even so, the sleeping young man still couldn't conceal his appearance. Juanxiu is clean, like green bamboo after rain. Sitting on the brocade stool by the bed, Mei Xue reached out and lifted the thin quilt, then untied the white lining on Li Jin's upper body. Scattered dark red spots almost covered Li Jinji's upper body, especially his chest and abdomen. There is extensive skin discoloration at the joints of the arms and legs. This is the imprint left by repeated rashes that occur year-round. Mei Xue couldn't help but let out a slight sigh in her heart. She had seen so many patients in her past life, and many people couldn't bear it. They would agree to use hormones, and even plead with doctors to give her an overdose. Just because the heart-wrenching pain is unbearable. She couldn't imagine how Li Jinji in front of her had resisted for over a decade. Fearing that it would affect Mei Xue's diagnosis, Xiao Yan closed his mouth without saying a word. The princess of Shu covered her mouth with a handkerchief and silently shed tears. Shen Qingyang looked at Mei Xue with a cold expression, holding his hands behind his back. She didn't first diagnose Li Jinji's pulse like other doctors, but only stared at Li Jinji's chest repeatedly. Repeatedly and gently pressing with his fingers, even lowering his head, the tip of his nose almost touched Li Jinji's skin. Xiao Yan was so nervous that he was almost suffocating. When he saw Mei Xue start covering Li Jinji with inner clothes and brocade quilts, he trembled and asked Mei Xue, "Miss Mei, what do you see? Can my cousin's illness be cured or not?" Mei Xue remained silent, then went to clean her hands and stood by the bed without saying a word. Li Jinji is not the widely rumored tuberculosis, and it can even be said that he is not sick at all. He just had a foreign body in his left lung, which had been with flesh and blood for too long. There should be metal on the foreign object, and it took a long time for him to repeatedly have a fever for consultation. So much so that later on, he frequently coughed up blood and was recognized by the doctor as tuberculosis. What surprised Mei Xue was that Li Jinji began to develop the disease after the age of 5, and the foreign body was quite large, making it impossible for a 5-year-old child to swallow it. Unless someone forces him. Thinking of this, Mei Xue raised her eyes to look at the Princess of Shu. The middle-aged lady, who had just reached middle age, was too haggard. Her gaze was filled with sadness and prayer. Mei Xue pursed her lips, lowered her eyes, and remained silent. Although she lives in a secluded countryside, she has also heard of some things about the royal family. Li Jinji is almost 20 years old, but the king of Shu still refuses to grant him the title of crown prince, which is widely discussed among the people. So, she can't say anything now. She must wait until the king of Shu appears. She needs to see the king's attitude towards Li Jinji in order to decide whether she should tell the truth and how much she can say. She had never experienced the bloodshed in the deep house, but the memories left by Zhoni were enough to make her toss and turn for many nights. A faint fragrance rushed over, and the king of Shu hurriedly arrived, followed by a beautiful and charming woman. She has a graceful figure, a slender waist that cannot be easily grasped, and her face is like a peach blossom in spring, swaying and swaying as she walks. The princess of Shu's face stiffened for a moment, but she immediately bowed to the prince of Shu. The king of Shu did not look at the princess of Shu, but casually waved his hand, his gaze fixed on Li Jinji and Mei Xue. The beautiful woman gently bowed to the princess of Shu, even though her eyes were red, the charm of the corners of her eyes and eyebrows could not be concealed. The princess of Shu wiped her tears and personally helped the beautiful woman, saying, "It's also very difficult for my younger sister to serve the prince, and there's no need to be so polite." The beautiful woman's delicate face flashed with a hint of smile, and she personally supported the princess of Shu to ask her to sit down next to the king of Shu, while she stood beside the king of Shu and gently looked at Mei Xue. From the moment the beautiful woman entered the door, Xiao Yan lowered his face and stopped speaking, while Shen Qingyang remained the same, standing with a cold face like a stone figure. The king of Shu looked at Mei Xue for a while before asking in a deep voice, "What can be seen?" Mei Xue pursed her lips, bowed to the king of Shu, and said straightforwardly, "Not to mention what kind of illness the young master is, let me first explain 2 methods for treating this disease. First, conservative treatment, decoction, acupuncture and moxibustion can ensure that the child wakes up without excessive pain, but it can only delay the child's life, up to the end of this summer. Secondly, if radical treatment methods are adopted and fail, the young master will not be able to hold out for a short period of time. If successful, you only need to recuperate for another 3 or 2 months, and the young master will be no different from ordinary people in the future." Speaking of which, Mei Xue raised her eyes and looked straight at the king of Shu, saying, "If the prince wants to use the second method, the daughter of the commoners needs the prince to personally write a warrant to pardon the daughter of the commoner's innocence, otherwise the daughter cannot take action to heal the prince." At this moment, even Shen Qingyang was moved by Mei Xue's boldness. He twitched his lips twice, but ultimately remained silent. Xiao Yan, however, was so shocked that he stumbled and almost fell. Seeing that the king of Shu had already thrown the tea-cup at hand in anger, he quickly rushed forward and knelt down, pleading with the king of Shu. "Please calm your anger, uncle. Miss Mei is a person with a true temperament, and there is only one thing to say. Besides, my cousin has already arrived in such a field. Please bear more for the sake of my deceased aunt." Mei Xue remained calm, unwilling to even kneel down. She only glanced faintly at the Prince of Shu and his wife, as well as the surprised beauty, and then lowered her eyes and remained silent. She is actually confident that she can cure Li Jinji's illness, but her first priority is to ensure her own interests, at least her own safety. If the king of Shu cannot accept her conditions, she will leave or adopt a conservative approach to let Li Jinji hold on for a few more months. If the king of Shu is willing to accept her harsh demands, it proves that Li Jinji's position in his heart is not low. In this situation, at least until Li Jinji recovers from illness, the king of Shu will not let her down. Since Li Jinji grew up with the late emperor in the palace, anyone who dares to take action against him and has the ability to do so must be the most precious among all. So, if she reveals the truth, there is a possibility of causing a huge uproar in the royal palace and even the palace. Therefore, she needs the ruler of the Shu prince's mansion to provide her with a certain degree of protection. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Assassination. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Assassination. The king of Shu gritted his teeth and remained silent, with veins visible on the back of his tightly clenched hand. As a prince, even if he were the current emperor, his elder brother would not openly threaten him like this. The Empress Dowager of Shu choked up and knelt beside Xiao Yan, supporting the king of Shu's knee and pleading. Prince, you can see how much Jin has suffered over the years. When he falls ill, his concubine is tormented day and night, fearing that he will come underground and have no face to meet his sister. Please, my lord. Jin has a kind heart, and heaven will definitely favor him. Let's let Miss Mei give it a try. The princess of Shu cried uncontrollably, and the beautiful woman standing also shed tears. While supporting the princess of Shu, she also pleaded with the prince of Shu. Shen Qingyang suddenly walked up from the corner and saluted the king of Shu, saying, Prince, the Empress Dowager has been sick for a long time. This year's birthday banquet, the eldest young master will return to the capital no matter what. The king of Shu was once again furious and jumped up, pointing at Shen Qingyang and cursing angrily. It's not your turn to speak here. Even if I'm not doing well, I'm still the Holy One's younger brother, and you're just a dog of our Li family. Mei Xue raised her eyes and glanced lightly at Shen Qingyang, then lowered her gaze again. Shen Qingyang remained expressionless as he looked at the king of Shu and said coldly. It's not important what I am, what's important is that I understand clearly. If the eldest prince cannot go to the capital to fulfill his filial piety for the prince, his majesty will definitely blame him. The king of Shu was so angry that he trembled all over. He slapped Shen Qingyang firmly in the face and said, Whether I am filial to my mother or not, and whether I respect your majesty or not, I will have my ancestors watching from heaven. Today, I am taking my own son on a risk, just for the sake of the wishes of the whole mother, and it has nothing to do with you. The wicked dog Shen Qingyang's face instantly showed a few red fingerprints, but he didn't pay any attention. He twisted his face and instructed Peng Luoyang, who was waiting at the door, to say, Go, get some paper and pen. Peng Luoyang ran away and the king of Shu sat heavily back in the round chair. He stared at Mei Xue for a while before suddenly sneering and saying, Okay, great. I've lived for a long time and thought there were only my brother's dog among the craziest people in the world. I didn't expect you to be one too. Can you tell me now what exactly is Wang Jinji's illness at this moment? Mei Xue finally believed in the feelings of the king of Shu towards Li Jinji. She slowed down her voice and bowed to the king of Shu, saying, The young master is not actually suffering from tuberculosis. He just has a foreign body in his left lung. As long as the foreign body is removed and nurtured for a few more months, the young master can be no different from ordinary people. The air in the bedroom fell into an unprecedented silence, and the princess of Shu fell back into her round chair before trembling for a long time. Open the chest and cut open the abdomen to get something from the lungs. Aren't you going to kill my son? The blush on the face of the beautiful woman next to her also faded completely in an instant. Her lips trembled as she pointed at Mei Xue and said, You're so bold. Mei Xue's gaze swept lightly over the two female relatives in the palace and calmly said, Civilian women do not need to have their young master undergo a chest and abdominal section. Foreign objects can be removed from the patient's mouth without causing any harm to the patient. The king of Shu's body suddenly shook, his eyes fixed on Mei Xue, and it took him a long time to ask in a deep voice. "What else do you need?" Mei Xue twisted her face and looked at Li Jinji, who was still unconscious, saying, "I don't know if there is Tianshan ice silk in the mansion. If not, high-quality local silk is also acceptable." The king of Shu clearly did not know these trivial matters, so he turned to the princess of Shu. The princess of Shu quickly replied, "Prince, last spring His Majesty sent envoy Gui Yuan to treat Jin Ji, and among the gifts he sent was a box of Tianshan ice silk, which was said to be a tribute from Jiaoji Kingdom." The king of Shu nodded and ordered the attendants waiting outside to go and retrieve them immediately. Xiao Yan was so happy that he was about to cry. He eagerly asked Mei Xue what else she needed to prepare. Mei Xue looked around the spacious bedroom and said, "2 stoves, rolled with white water and liquor, placed in this room, an unused clean steamer, and a golden thread, the thinner the better. I want another new set of men's clothing with tied sleeves, preferably white and sun-dried. I need to take a shower first." These things were extremely ordinary for the royal family, and the servants immediately took action. An old lady followed closely and invited Mei Xue to the side room. 2 maids were waiting at the entrance of the clean room, and Mei Xue entered. They followed behind to prepare to go in and serve. Mei Xue refused and shook her head, saying, "I can do it myself, you guys stay here." The 2 maids nodded and bowed their heads in an orderly manner from beginning to end. The bathtub is tall and steamy, with 2 additional buckets of hot water placed next to the footstool. A snow-white cloth towel and a white men's outfit are draped on the wooden frame. Mei Xue looked around the clean room and her gaze fell on the side door for a moment before she untied her clothes. Sitting in the hot water, Mei Xue pressed the wooden hairpin under her feet and gently rubbed her fingers. She has undergone many such surgeries in her previous life and has never missed them. Although she can see through her eyes now, her other conditions are too poor, and she is not very confident. Mei Xue repeated the details she needed to pay attention to several times in her mind, making sure she hadn't missed them before taking a long sigh of relief, closing her eyes and preparing to take a break. Without any sound, a dark figure entered through the side door of the clean room and walked silently behind Mei Xue. Mei Xue in the bathtub was still resting with her eyes closed, seemingly unaware, but as soon as the dark figure lifted the ribbon in her hand, she suddenly stood up, turned her head, and with just one click, accurately inserted the wooden hairpin in her right hand into the woman's eyes behind her. The woman in the sauce-colored clothes screamed and fell to the ground, covering her eyes and wailing incessantly. The maid outside the door quickly ran in, and Mei Xue had already put on her clothes. With a faint expression, she instructed them. "Leave her here, go to the main room and inform the prince." The woman lying on the ground was covered in blood on her face, and the 2 maids were frightened and at a loss. When Mei Xue told them not to take action, the 2 of them quickly retreated. Mei Xue didn't look at the woman rolling and howling on the ground, but slowly put on her clothes, shoes, and socks. Quickly, several sturdy women rushed in with ropes, first bowing to Mei Xue, and then tying the women on the ground and carrying them out. Mei Xue put her silver lilac earrings into her sleeve and picked up the cloth strap on the ground to follow behind. The king of Shu stood in the courtyard with a dark face, while Shen Qingyang remained calm. Xiao Yan was so anxious that he ran up to Mei Xue and asked her if she was okay. When the princess of Shu and the beautiful woman stood next to the prince of Shu and saw the person bound on the ground, her face turned pale and she almost fell. The woman in the sauce-colored clothes cried and begged the princess of Shu to save her. Mei Xue threw the cloth strap in her hand and calmly looked at the prince of Shu, saying, "She just wanted to strangle me from behind." Xiao Yan finally regained his senses and looked up at the woman. After a while, he trembled and said, Isn't it Qian Mama who serves her aunt?" After speaking, Xiao Yan looked at the princess of Shu in shock, his eyes filled with heartache and confusion. The princess of Shu shook off the beautiful woman's hand and grabbed the king of Shu's sleeve, crying and explaining. Prince, please believe in my body. I really don't know what's going on with my body. I have been guarding the Jin's house for several days. Since Miss Mei arrived, you have been watching me. I have not had the opportunity to command anyone to take action against Miss Mei. The king of Shu ignored the princess of Shu and shook off her hand, saying to the beautiful woman next to him. You stay here watching her, no one is allowed to leave until the matter is over. The beautiful woman responded with tears in her eyes. When the king of Shu led Mei Xue, Xiao Yan, Shen Qingyang, and others to the main room, she immediately turned cold and raised her chin to stare fiercely at Mei Xue's back. Ordering the servants to stand far away, the princess of Shu chuckled and looked at the beautiful woman, saying, Concubine Lin has good tactics. I don't even know when that slut from the Qian family became your person, but unfortunately she's too useless. Lin Bianfei also laughed and looked at the horizon with a distant expression, saying, Sister, you made me tremble for over a decade, and I was just bribing a servant next to you. Why are you so angry? The princess of Shu laughed so much that tears welled up in her eyes, and sneered at Lin Bianfei. At this point, you are also very clear that as long as the witch succeeds, you cannot escape. Why do you still pretend to be indifferent to the situation so far? Lin Bianfei turned her head and looked at the princess of Shu with a smile, saying, Sister, can I get away? It depends on your good son lying in bed, not on you taking things for granted here. What's your hurry? The princess of Shu instantly changed her face and stared coldly at the concubine Lin. What do you mean? Lin Bianfei smiled coquettishly. She stopped looking at the princess of Shu and turned her gaze to the distant horizon, saying, Sister, it only takes 1 or 2 hours of effort. Let's wait slowly, don't worry. Lin Bianfei said this, and the princess of Shu became more and more anxious, but Lin Bianfei refused to pay attention to her anymore. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Zhi Zhu Yuan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Zhi Zhu Yuan, Xiao Yan and Shen Qingyang stood behind the king of Shu, all three of them looking solemnly at Mei Xue. The golden silk was repeatedly scalded and washed in hot water and hot wine. The white and bright Tianchan ice silk was tightly wrapped around the golden silk, then wrapped in a white cloth and steamed in a steamer. When it was taken out again, the two things had perfectly blended together. Mei Xue still had a faint expression, remained silent, lowered her eyes, and repeatedly rubbed her hands in hot water until they turned red. She wiped her hands carefully with sake a few more times, and Mei Xue extended her arms, waiting for both hands to air dry naturally before picking up the white golden thread. The golden thread is extremely thin, and even after being wrapped around the silkworms, it still trembles and shakes. Mei Xue bent a tiny hook at the top of the golden thread, then looked up at the king of Shu and others and said, No matter what happens later, you are not allowed to speak out and disturb me. I won't call you, and you will never come over to help me. At this moment, even the king of Shu ignored Mei Xue's disrespect and immediately nodded, silently responding. Using 2 stacked cotton cloths to open Li Jinji's mouth, Mei Xue slowly put the gold thread in her hand. The speed of Jin Xi's progress is extremely slow, so slow that it seems to have been stagnant. The woman wore white clothes and tied her hair, without even wearing the only silver clove earrings. She knelt sideways on the brocade mat by the bed, her eyes completely fixed on Li Jinji, without looking at her own hands. From the mouth to the throat, and then to the chest, the gaze of the king of Shu and others moved with Mei Xue's gaze. Time seemed to have slowed to a standstill, and Xiao Yan felt like he was almost suffocating from nervousness. However, he still dared not even take big breaths for fear of startling Mei Xue. It was gradually getting dark, and Xiao Yan's lips trembled as he quietly glanced at the darkened window. He was afraid that Mei Xue wouldn't be able to see, so he wanted to go and light the light immediately, but he didn't dare to move. His legs were heavy as if they had been filled with lead. Shen Qingyang remained silent, but quietly turned around and lit the 2 palace lamps in the corner. The light shone on Mei Xue's face, and beads of sweat slowly slid down her cheeks. Qiao Yan suddenly had red circles under his eyes. Finally, the golden thread slowly withdrew from Li Jinji's mouth and placed it on the plate on the low table, along with a clump of flesh and blood at the top. Mei Xue sat slumped on the ground for a long time before reluctantly standing up on the edge of the bed. The king of Shu and others finally regained their senses, and he immediately stood up. Qiao Yan quickly ran to Mei Xue's side and asked her with concern if she was okay. The king of Shu had already rushed to the bed and saw that blood was continuously flowing out from the corner of Li Jinji's mouth. He turned pale again. Mei Xue followed the gaze of the king of Shu and looked at Li Jinji. She bent down and placed a white cloth towel on Li Jinji's neck, speaking hoarsely. He has accumulated a lot of dirty blood in his lungs, and it's good that it can flow out now. The king of Shu obviously couldn't fully believe it, but he gritted his teeth and nodded. Shen Qingyang had already turned on all the lights in the room. He walked to the bedside and silently looked at Li Jinji before leaving the room. Qiao Yan was mixed with surprise and joy, almost about to burst into tears. The face of the king of Shu was filled with an indescribable weariness, but in less than 2 hours, he seemed to have grown much older all of a sudden. He looked at his eldest son who was still asleep, closed his eyes hard, and asked Mei Xue. "Miss Mei, do you have anything else to tell me?" Mei Xue raised her head and looked quietly at the side face of the king of Shu for a while before saying. The young master began to develop symptoms after his 5th birthday. It was impossible for a child at that age to swallow such a large tassel like Nanju, so someone must have forced him, even applying lubricant to the beads. The king of Shu fell silent again, but Mei Xue could see his lips trembling violently. The king of Shu did not speak anymore, only pointing to the plate holding the southern pearl and gesturing for Qiao Yan to pick it up and follow him. Peng Liang entered the room and respectfully bowed to Mei Xue, saying, "Miss Mei, if you have anything, just tell me." Mei Xue nodded, and Peng Liang stood at the door of the bedroom with his hand down. The room was already cleaned up, and a servant brought in food. After cleaning her hands and face, Mei Xue sat down at the table. A few refreshing dishes, a bowl of rice porridge, a plate of chicken oil rolls. The person preparing the meal seems to understand Mei Xue's thoughts very well, knowing that she can't eat anything greasy at this moment. Seeing Mei Xue not moving her chopsticks, the servant thought it was because she was not satisfied with the food, and quickly bowed and explained. "This is what Lord Shen ordered. If the girl doesn't like it, the maid will go up and replace it." Mei Xue was surprised, even Peng Liang standing at the door raised his head in surprise, completely unable to believe that this was something Shen Qingyang would do. "I just want to eat something light, which is very good." Mei Xue comforted the frightened woman, and took up congee in a small bowl of white porcelain. Shen Qingyang never returned, but it was Qiao Yan who returned in the late night with a face full of disappointment. Mei Xue was sitting by the bed reading, while Li Jinji was still asleep. When Qiao Yan entered the door, Peng Liang bowed to him. He didn't even glance at him, so he walked over to sit down next to Mei Xue. Mei Xue looked up and glanced at Qiao Yan's haggard face, then lowered her head to read her own book. "Miss Mei, thank you for saving my cousin. You are the benefactor of my Qiao Yan and our Qiao family. No matter what happens in the future, as long as you speak up, I will never refuse." Qiao Yan's voice carried a strong sense of fatigue and sadness. Mei Xue closed her book and stood up to put a new cloth towel under Li Jinji's neck. "Young Master Qiao, there's no need to be so polite. Since this is a disease that I can treat, regardless of the patient's identity, I will do my best." Mei Xue spoke and poured a glass of water, handing it to Qiao Yan. Qiao Yan held his water glass motionless for a while before suddenly choking up and saying, "That Nanju was the betrothal gift for Consort Lin when she married into the royal family, but she said she was unjustly accused, claiming that her aunt had stolen her jewelry and framed her. Moreover, when she lost this jewelry back then, she had informed her uncle. My aunt said that Qian Mama was planted by concubine Lin beside her. Concubine Lin was afraid that her conspiracy would be exposed after Miss Mei saved her cousin, so she asked Qian Mama to kill Miss Mei and also drag her into the water. Xiao Yan was clearly hit hard by today's farce, and by the time he said this, his eyes were already red. I don't believe my aunt will harm my cousin. She treats my cousin better than my cousin Feng. Mei Xue looked at the young man in the candlelight, feeling speechless. She naturally couldn't determine who the true culprit was between the princess of Shu and the concubine of Lin, or perhaps the true culprit was not among these two people at all. The Xiao family was able to produce 2 Shu princesses, but the current queen is still a commoner. That must be a noble family in the capital, but Xiao Yan has developed such a sensitive and simple temperament. So, what about Li Jinji's biological mother? Is it the same as Xiao Yan? Mei Xue glanced at the sleeping Li Jinji and then silently lowered her eyes. She will do her best to make Li Jinji recover soon, and then follow him to the capital to meet Grandma Mei. For her, this should be the best and safest method currently available. Xiao Yan sat by Li Jinji's bed until the sky was dim. Unable to bear it, he lay on the edge of the bed and fell asleep. Li Jinji slept soundly in the candlelight, and Mei Xue sat beside him with her head down, occasionally flipping through a page of a book. The two of them seemed to be familiar for a long time. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Awakening. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Awakening. Li Jinji opened his eyes at the beginning of dawn, and when he made a gesture, Xiao Yan was immediately awakened. He bent down and hugged Li Jinji's shoulder, crying loudly. Mei Xue leaned against the bed pillar and fell asleep. Startled by Xiao Yan's crying, she suddenly sat up straight and opened her eyes. Peng Liang also hurriedly walked towards the bedside. Mei Xue stood up and gently patted Xiao Yan's shoulder, saying, "Get up, let me take another look." Xiao Yan quickly stood up, still wiping his tears with his sleeves. Li Jinji looked at Mei Xue with a smile on his face, his warm eyes shining with stars. He wanted to say, "Thank you," to Mei Xue, but with all his strength, he only moved his lips slightly and couldn't make a sound. Mei Xue sat down on the brocade stool that Xiao Yan had given way to, and with just one glance at Li Jin, she lifted the brocade from his body and said, "Don't talk, don't waste your strength. If there is no problem after I check, you can drink some porridge first." Li Jinji blinked his eyes and said he understood. Peng Liang quickly asked if he wanted to report to the king of Shu. Xiao Yan was very impatient and kicked Peng Liang, saying, "Why are you talking so much nonsense? Hurry up and go." Peng Liang was not angry either. He laughed and ran out quickly. Mei Xue was completely undisturbed, just lowered her head and stared carefully at Li Jinji's chest examination, occasionally lightly pressing with her fingers. The woman was dressed in white and had black hair. Her fingers were warm and delicate, and she even gently lifted his chin to allow her to look closer at his throat. He could even smell the faint fragrance of camellia on her hair. Li Jinji's face immediately turned red, even her ears turned red. Mei Xue didn't notice, but Xiao Yan didn't care to cry anymore and laughed mockingly at Li Jinji. "Cousin, I just said it's not possible for you to have Peng Liang and Gao Yuan and a few stinky men serve you all day. Look, Miss Mei is a doctor. I'll just give you a look, and you'll be so embarrassed." Li Jinji's face turned even redder, and only then did Mei Xue notice something unusual. She sat up straight and said to Li Jinji, "This is a necessary step, and you should check it every few days in the future. Don't be shy, young master." Seeing Li Jinji's face noticeably turning even redder, Mei Xue couldn't help but laugh. She didn't want to make Li Jinji feel any worse, so she stood up and said to Xiao Yan, "Starting from today, I will be responsible for the eldest son's food and drink, and I will personally deliver every meal. In addition, the soup and medicine I used to drink can all be stopped. How can a person still have an appetite to eat by pouring a few large bowls of bitter medicine soup every day? Xiao Yan naturally did not want Li Jin to suffer. After hearing Mei Xue's words, his eyes lit up with joy. The young man who likes to dress up beautifully completely forgot the emotional impact he had last night at this moment. Mei Xue nodded at Li Jinji, then turned around and walked outside. The spring light rushed into the room at the moment the door opened, and the woman's back was bathed in the spring light, hazy as if in fog. Xiao Yan looked at Li Jinji with his eyes fixed on the direction Mei Xue had left, then sat down by the bed and smiled, saying, "Cousin, can't you imagine that the goddess doctor I brought is so young? And, let me tell you, Miss Mei has an extremely straightforward personality, doesn't say much, and doesn't have the usual affectation of an ordinary girl. Instead, she has a bit of a manly aura." The smile on Li Jin's face was even stronger, and he couldn't speak, so he could only gently shake Xiao Yan's hand to express gratitude. Mei Xue went to the yard and asked a woman to accompany her to the warehouse of the royal mansion to collect some medicinal herbs, and then went all the way to the kitchen. The kitchen butler led his subordinates to line up outside the door, each with a respectful expression. People used to say that the eldest son was hopeless this time. Who would have thought that such a young female doctor could bring the eldest son back to life? Thinking that Mei Xue was going to boil medicine for Li Jinji herself, we could see that she put the washed medicine and chicken shreds into the congee, and everyone was surprised. They cooked porridge all day long. The master asked for anything to be added, but they never saw anything added to congee in the past. Isn't that too bitter to swallow? Gradually, they all showed an incredulous expression, as they did not smell the bitter taste of the medicine, but instead had a faint and fragrant scent rushing towards them. When Mei Xue finishes cooking congee, the steward comes forward to help put congee in the food box, and smiles blandly. "Miss, this skill is really amazing. The old servant has been cooking for most of his life and has never seen anyone who can make medicine taste sweet." Mei Xue smiled faintly and took the food box handed over by the steward, saying, "The taste of medicine varies, and some can be mixed together in appropriate proportions, resulting in a significant change in taste. If Auntie likes it, I can write a prescription for you. If you have a family with weak qi, you can also endure it and drink to nourish yourself." The steward was both surprised and delighted, and hurriedly bowed and thanked Mei Xue. In the eyes of ordinary people, any exclusive prescription is extremely precious, which is why there is a saying that a prescription can support several generations. But this girl from the countryside, so young, how could she be so open-minded? Refusing the servant's kindness, Mei Xue carried a food box and walked towards Zhi Zhu garden. The late-bloomed apricot blossom powder spread like morning clouds, overwhelming the sky. Shen Qingyang stood with his hands behind his back under the apricot tree, looking coldly at Mei Xue walking slowly. Mei Xue naturally saw Shen Qingyang and didn't hesitate. She walked over to him calmly and asked if there was anything wrong. Shen Qingyang sneered and said, "Miss Mei worked hard all day and night without rest, but she only had a meal to eat. Why does she have to do it herself?" At first, she was somewhat grateful for the meal arranged by Shen Qingyang in her heart, but now seeing his strange and gloomy appearance, Mei Xue's face turned cold again and said calmly, "Don't you hope Li Jinji can come back to Beijing with you soon? I'm doing this to help you." Shen Qingyang snorted sarcastically and reached out to pat off a few apricot blossoms that had fallen on his shoulder, saying, "The curse of beauty is not just about women, but also about Li Jinji's face. You are one of the smarter women I have ever met. You should know what you can and cannot do." Mei Xue finally understood what Shen Qingyang meant and was immediately smirked. She looked contemptuously into Shen Qingyang's eyes and said, "You can be dirty in your own heart, but don't think others are the same as you. Even if I encounter a beggar on the roadside, if I can treat his illness, I will still do my best." After speaking, Mei Xue turned around and left. Shen Qingyang's face turned dark and he stared at Mei Xue's back, saying, "What kind of woman Li Jinji can be with is not only something he can't decide for himself, but even the king of Shu knows he can't interfere. Otherwise, his eldest son won't dare to get engaged even when he's almost 20 years old. Mei Xue didn't even pause in her footsteps and walked straight away along the path in the apricot blossom forest. At the entrance of the main courtyard stood 2 rows of servants with their heads hanging down, and the king of Shu sat in front of Li Jin's bed. Xiao Yan welcomed Mei Xue in and warmly took the food box from her hand. The king of Shu's face was still not good, but when he saw Mei Xue, he nodded slightly and pointed to the nearby brocade stool to signal her to sit down. Mei Xue did not sit down and bowed to the king of Shu, saying, "Women need to rest for 2 hours. This tonic diet, you can only eat half or half full these days, otherwise your teeth and stomach will be damaged. In 2 or 3 days, the women will add other foods to the young master depending on the situation. Please rest assured." Prince the king of Shu nodded and turned his face to look at Li Jinji. Seeing that he had been smiling at Mei Xue, he said to him, "Remember Miss Mei's words, rest assured and take care of yourself. Everything will be decided by your father, so don't worry." As he spoke, the king of Shu also stood up, clearly intending to leave with Mei Xue. Xiao Yan saw off the king of Shu and Mei Xue, and Peng Liang opened his food box. The fragrant aroma immediately hit his face, and he was so happy that he quickly helped Li Jinji sit up. After slowly taking a few mouthfuls of congee, Li Jinji finally spoke slowly and said to Peng Liang, "When Gao Yuan comes back, immediately let him come to see me. Mr. Song, please pass on a message and ask him to arrange for someone to take care of the queen. There must be no mistakes." Peng Liang nodded repeatedly and whispered, "I remember all these subordinates. The master just needs to rest assured and recuperate." Li Jinji lowered his eyes and smiled, his hand holding the silver spoon trembling uncontrollably. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Hidden Diseases. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Hidden Diseases. It's almost noon, the sunlight is bright and dazzling. The king of Shu stood with a heavy face for a while and directly asked Mei Xue. According to the girl, when will Jinji be able to set off for Beijing at the earliest? Mei Xue didn't think much and said to the king of Shu. The young master's body needs to fully recover, and it will take at least 6 months. If you must set off early, then taking the waterway is the only option, and you need to prepare all emergency herbs and other materials in advance. The king of Shu became a little restless again and gritted his teeth in anger, saying, "The waterway will take at least 3 months to walk, definitely not. Shen Qingyang, that vicious dog, won't agree." Xiao Yan was also anxious and quickly said, "Uncle, why don't I hurry back to the capital first and ask my grandmother to beg the empress and the empress dowager? Maybe it's possible." The king of Shu sneered and said, "The matter of sending the crown prince to the capital to serve as the empress dowager's attendant had already caused a stir. At this time, no matter who begged, he could not stop him from accusing Jin of unfilial piety. Everyone understands that what the king of Shu said was pointing out Emperor Da, which is a great disrespect. But Xiao Yan and Mei Xue only pretended not to hear. After thinking for a moment, Mei Xue slowly whispered, "If the prince wants the eldest son to rest for a period of time and enters the capital by water, there is actually no way out." The king of Shu and Xiao Yan looked at Mei Xue at the same time, and Xiao Yan's voice trembled with eagerness. "Miss Mei, what can we do? Tell me quickly. If Shen Qingyang is too sick to get up, and even if he recovers, he can't ride on horseback, then all the problems will be easily solved." Mei Xue spoke calmly, with even a faint smile in her eyes. Xiao Yan's face changed instantly and tentatively said to Mei Xue, "Miss Mei, Shen Qingyang has extremely strong martial arts skills and a meticulous mind that no one can match. Moreover, he is a person sent by His Majesty, so we dare not poison him, otherwise the entire royal palace will be implicated." Even the king of Shu's gaze at Mei Xue was a bit different now. Mei Xue was speechless and looked at Xiao Yan helplessly, saying, Shen Qingyang has a hidden illness of his own, and as long as the method is appropriate, it is easy to induce his hidden illness. Miss, are you saying Shen Qingyang is sick? And he is very seriously ill? Xiao Yan looked incredulous. Shen Qingyang's martial arts are so good that he has never been defeated by anyone in the entire Jin dynasty for so many years. No matter how you look at it, it's impossible for someone to be sick. Mei Xue, however, confidently said. He has a large number of iron needle-shaped things in his body, which should be due to his strong body and constant use of internal power to control, so these things did not enter the organ's positions. However, he must have lived day and night in the torment of pain, especially in rainy and snowy days. The king of Shu also showed a surprised expression at this moment, and Xiao Yan was so surprised that he couldn't speak at all. Shen Qingyang acted decisively and had a hard heart, and it was impossible to see that he had such a serious illness. Mei Xue held her hands behind her back, thought for a moment, and then continued. Just add some seafood to Shen Qingyang's meals, preferably using seafood to make a thick soup for cooking. The salt taste is also slightly stronger, and in just a few days, his illness will definitely break out. The earlier this disease is treated, the better. Once those needle-like substances enter the internal organs, he will undoubtedly die. So, this can't be considered as harming him, can it? Xiao Yan let out a long breath and asked with some concern. This method is good or bad, but I don't know if Shen Qingyang will fall for it. Maybe he also knows what he needs to pay attention to for his illness. Mei Xue pursed her lips and said somewhat sarcastically. A person who can suffer from this disease must have encountered some unspeakable hidden danger. With his temperament, he definitely wouldn't easily seek help from others, otherwise it wouldn't have lasted until now. Moreover, even if a doctor can diagnose his illness, no one can cure it, except for me who can help him. This statement was very arrogant, but when it came from Mei Xue's mouth, neither the king of Shu nor Xiao Yan felt it was a wild remark. After Mei Xue finished speaking, she bowed to the king of Shu, gestured to Xiao Yan, and then walked out of Zhi Zhu garden. Xiao Yan stared blankly at Mei Xue's back. In his impression, Mei Xue was an extremely reserved person, and she refused to say a word about things unrelated to her. It's really strange to be willing to help my cousin so attentively now. Although Xiao Yan also felt that his cousin Li Jinji was unmatched in both appearance and demeanor, Miss Mei was clearly not a vulgar person who looked at her face. Otherwise, he and Shen Qingyang are both outstanding good men, why does she never look at them in the eye? The face of the king of Shu gradually showed a smile, instructing Xiao Yan to guard Li Jinji well in the Zhi Zhu garden, while he hurriedly went to the study outside the courtyard to meet a few staff members. Seafood is a rare item in the entire Shu region, but it is not a rare item for the royal family. At least now, there are salted and air-dried seafood in the warehouse. Several confidants of the king of Shu all thought this was a good solution, and there was no apparent risk involved. They had originally planned to use the drought in eastern Sichuan this spring to arrange for some fake victims to block the way, rob and kill, in order to refuse Shen Qingyang's request for Li Jinji to go by land. But we all know that this method has great risks. Emperor Mingde has no idea how many eyeliner there are in Sichuan. Even the Shu prince's mansion must have personnel arranged by Emperor Mingde. But now no one knows that Shen Qingyang has a hidden illness, let alone that he cannot eat more seafood. If Shen Qingyang falls ill, what will happen to the Shu prince's mansion? A middle-aged scholar in his 40s, with a fair complexion, white clothes and a white fan, and a strand of beautiful beard, smiled and said to the king of Shu. Prince, since that's the case, then the memorial requesting the crown prince's title for the eldest prince can be sent to the capital. Send a few more people together and don't have to go too hastily. Along the way, there will be more scattered messages, saying that the eldest prince's illness has just improved and he set off, but his body is too weak, so he can only walk slowly by water. The king of Shu nodded and said. Mr. Song is absolutely right. You will be responsible for this matter, and whoever will be arranged will be up to you. Song Jijie stood up to pay his respects to the king of Shu, and after completing his duties, he left the study first. A servant rushed into the courtyard outside and met Song Jijie, who quickly bowed and respectfully said, "Please rest assured, Mr. Song. The second and third young masters are almost home, and Manager Feng has asked me to report to the prince." Song Jijie glanced back at the study and said to the servant in a warm voice, "The prince is busy, please wait in the yard for a few gentlemen to come out before entering." The servant quickly thanked Song Jijie and bowed his head to escort him out of the yard. After combing and sleeping for 2 hours, Mei Xue's spirit has completely recovered. As soon as I opened the door, I saw a woman wearing a dark blue rolling white edge outfit standing in the yard. The skin tone is slightly black, and the body is tall and sturdy. As soon as the woman in blue saw Mei Xue, her big black eyes immediately curved into crescents, and she quickly stepped forward to bow to Mei Xue, saying, "Greetings to the young lady. My servant's name is Jiu'er, and the eldest son has sent his servant to serve the young lady." Mei Xue looked at Jiu'er for a moment, but didn't ask anything else. She just said lightly, "I'm going to the kitchen, you come with me." Jiu'er followed closely behind Mei Xue and left the courtyard of the guest room. In the apricot blossom forest, Shen Qingyang leaned against the tree with his arms clasped in his arms, staring coldly at Mei Xue and Jiu'er as they approached. Mei Xue didn't even glance at Shen Qingyang and walked straight in front of him. Jiu'er bit her lips and quietly turned around to look at Shen Qingyang, whispering to Mei Xue, "Miss, this person's martial arts are very good. Even Peng Liang and Gao Yuan can't beat him." Mei Xue didn't take up the topic and instead glanced at Jiu'er and asked, "I've seen Peng Liang before. Who is Gao Yuan?" Seeing Mei Xue finally showing interest in speaking, Jiu'er quickly replied, "Peng Liang and Gao Yuan were people who grew up with the eldest son from a young age, while the parents of the servants were the dowries of the former princess." Mei Xue remained silent again, only nodded and continued walking forward. Jiu'er bit her lips and lowered her head, afraid to speak anymore. Today, it is widely rumored in Chengdu that the royal family has invited a female divine doctor to cure the eldest son's illness. She and her parents were also very happy, but they didn't expect that this female miracle doctor would be so young and very beautiful. I just said a little less, and at first glance it felt cold. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Sachet. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Sachet. He still stewed a cup of tonic diet, but Mei Xue didn't put chicken shreds into it this time, but picked up the sea base prepared next to him after tonic diet was cooked. The small and sharp blade only flashed a few times, and one of the main spines on the bass body and 3 large spines on the lower edge of the back corner were peeled off, even the skin of the fish was completely removed. But the whole body of the fish remained intact and undamaged. Jiu'er was so surprised that her mouth hadn't closed yet. Mei Xue had already sprinkled simple seasoning on the base and steamed it in the cage. The steward personally brought hot water to clean Mei Xue's hands, and handed her the prepared hot tea. Mei Xue took a sip of tea and looked up to see Jiu'er still looking at her in surprise. She pointed to the steamer shrouded in white mist and said, "For some patients, these are more useful than decoction." Jiu'er naturally didn't understand, but she still nodded repeatedly, her eyes filled with admiration. When Peng Liang led her into the inner courtyard, he reminded her that the eldest son had instructed her to listen to Miss Mei's orders and not show any disrespect or defiance. Jiu'er followed behind Mei Xue with a food box, and when the two of them passed by the Xinglin again, Shen Qingyang was no longer there. Xiao Yan has obviously passed his sad period, tidied up and restored his former characteristics. A dazzling red brocade robe, a tender goose yellow beauty fan, and a pair of golden boots on their feet. Jiu'er almost couldn't help but laugh when she saw Xiao Yan's attire. Mei Xue turned a blind eye and nodded lightly at Xiao Yan. 2 servants had just finished grooming Li Jinji when they saw Mei Xue enter the room. Li Jinji smiled and pointed to the brocade stool by the bed, asking Mei Xue to sit down. Mei Xue first cleared her hands and diagnosed Li Jinji's pulse before calmly saying, "Within a period of 1 to 2 months, the young master may still occasionally have a fever or rash, but the duration will become shorter and the frequency of attacks will also decrease, so there is no need to worry." Li Jinji nodded and whispered with a smile, "I believe in Miss Mei, and thank you very much for planning for me." It should be referring to Xinqingyang's situation. It seems that Xiao Yan can't wait to tell Li Jinji. Mei Xue was speechless. When she looked at Xiao Yan, he was laughing happily. "Since listening to Miss Mei's clever plan, my body and mind have been relaxed. I specially wore a festive outfit to celebrate for my cousin." Li Jinji was amused and chuckled softly, saying to Xiao Yan, "You should be more dignified in front of Miss Mei." Xiao Yan responded with a playful smile, but obviously didn't take it to heart. Watching Peng Liang open the food box, Mei Xue stood up and said to Xiao Yan, "No matter when the young master has a fever or other discomfort, he must immediately have someone call me, even at night without delay." Xiao Yan nodded repeatedly, and Mei Xue bid farewell to Li Jinji. Li Jinji nodded and whispered to Jiu'er, who was waiting behind Mei Xue. "Hello, take good care of Miss Mei. Apart from her orders, don't pay attention to anyone else's words." Jiu'er respectfully responded and bowed to Xiao Yan before following Mei Xue outside. Outside the Zhi Zhu garden, I happened to encounter 2 people walking around, both dressed in luxurious clothes and young in youth. The slightly taller black-clothed young master had a gloomy expression, while the younger white-clothed young master was full of energy. When Jiu'er bowed to them and called them second young master or third young master, Mei Xue nodded lightly and continued walking forward. The young master in black stood silent, while the young man in white stopped Jiu'er and asked a few words. Then, he quickly caught up with Mei Xue and said loudly, "Just now, I didn't know that the young lady was the divine doctor who saved my elder brother. It was very impolite. Please don't take it lightly, young lady." Mei Xue shook her head and said lightly, "Third young master, you're welcome." The young man laughed and said, "I just said that big brother Jiren has his own destiny and will definitely be fine. Isn't it just waiting for the divine doctor? I just didn't expect that you, young lady, have such excellent medical skills." Li Jinji had been ill for over a decade, and the famous doctors of Dajin were invited by the Shu prince's mansion. Even the imperial physicians and hospital officials of the imperial hospital came to Chengdu to treat him. Mei Xue shook her head and said in a low voice, "But it just happened that the young master couldn't praise me so much." As she spoke, Mei Xue glanced at the sachet hanging around Li Jinfeng's waist and nodded slightly before leading Jiu'er back to the guest house. Li Jinfeng watched as the 2 of them walked away before turning back and entering Zhi Zhu garden. From beginning to end, the young master in black remained silent, and when he looked at Mei Xue, his eyes were visibly gloomy. On the way back, Jiu'er took the initiative to introduce to Mei Xue. "Miss, the one wearing black clothes just now was second young master, born to concubine Lin. She is only a few months younger than the first young master and has already been engaged. She is the eldest daughter of the Huang family, a grain merchant. The one wearing white clothes is the third prince, born to the princess. He is only 13 years old this year and is very close to the eldest prince. Even his education is taught by the eldest prince himself." Mei Xue nodded and turned her face to look at Jiu'er as she walked, asking, "So, the third young master spends a lot of time with the eldest young master every day?" Jiu'er nodded with a smile. "That's natural. Except for a few days ago when the prince sent 2 young masters to investigate the disaster in eastern Sichuan, most of the time the third young master stayed in Zhi Zhu garden." Mei Xue let out a and didn't speak again, but a hint of coldness flashed through her eyes. "It seems that there are quite a few people in this royal mansion who want Li Jin to die." Mei Xue went to Zhi Zhu garden again after dinner. It was already dark, and the floor-to-ceiling palace lamps in various parts of the palace were already lit. Jiu'er followed Mei Xue with a food box in hand. As soon as she arrived near Zhi Zhu Garden, she smiled and said to Mei Xue, "Miss, look, the young master's servant is at the door, so the young master must still be inside." Mei Xue looked at the few servants standing outside the courtyard door and walked in without saying a word. Xiao Yan was not here at this moment, and Li Jinji was half sitting on the bed, leaning against two soft pillows behind him. It was about time to hear a sound. As soon as Mei Xue entered the room, he opened his eyes. And Li Jinfeng slept next to Li Jin, with his head pressed against him. Jiu'er and Peng Liang seemed to take this intimacy for granted, while Mei Xue was slightly surprised but did not show it on her face. Li Jinji smiled and waited for Mei Xue to sit on the brocade stool by the bed before he whispered. "My third brother was tired from a long journey and cried again just now, so he fell asleep a bit." Mei Xue didn't speak, only nodded silently. "The matter has not been thoroughly investigated yet. Both the queen and the concubine Lin have been banned, and Li Jinfeng and his elder brother are intimately connected. The impact they have suffered is probably not lighter than that of Xiao Yan in the beginning." Jiu'er and Peng Liang heated the contents of the food box on the stove outside, and after half an hour, Li Jinfeng finally woke up. As soon as he saw Mei Xue sitting by the bed, Li Jinfeng suddenly sat up and jumped out of the bed, saying, "Miss Mei, have I delayed you from diagnosing your elder brother? Hurry up." Li Jinji smiled and Wen Sheng said to Li Jinfeng, "I don't need to be diagnosed. Miss Mei is here to deliver dinner to me. Please wash your face first and don't panic." Li Jinfeng quickly called Jiu'er and Peng Liang to prepare the meal. He cleaned his hands and insisted on feeding Li Jinji, and the whole process was very serious. Mei Xue did not leave this time. She sat aside and lowered her gaze to look at the sachet around Li Jinfeng's waist. He couldn't eat too much. After finishing his meal, Li Jinji repeatedly urged Li Jinfeng to go eat too, and then he reluctantly went out. Peng Liang waited on Li Jinji to wash up for a while, then quietly retreated with Jiu'er. They could all see that Mei Xue had something to say to Li Jinji and wanted to avoid Li Jinfeng. Li Jin's face in the candlelight was like jade, and in just one day, both his face and spirit had undergone tremendous changes. Mei Xue turned her face to look at the huge bookshelf against the wall and whispered softly. "You are still very weak, so you should focus on rest these days and not spend too much time reading or worrying about various trivial matters." Li Jinji nodded and looked at Mei Xuehan with a smile, asking, "But what's wrong with third brother? Miss Mei, just say it and don't worry. This man is really meticulous." Mei Xue raised her eyes and quietly looked into Li Jinji's eyes, saying, "Nine-death resurrection grass is a herb that has a miraculous effect on stopping bleeding, but for you, it's best not to smell it at all because it can cause you to have more frequent fever and rashes. And the sachet that San Gongzi is wearing today contains this herb." End of this chapter.